an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Ascend, Children of Divinity, Book 3, Chapters 12 through 15.5. In this section, we get to find out what happened to Brian. I'm very excited about it. I don't like it, but I don't not like it. Does that make sense? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. And Heather is here in the chat. Hello! So first off, I have to mention that last week I fucked up. My apologies, Heather. Heather sent me a very helpful email telling me where to stop each episode reading because the chapters aren't demarcated in this Kindle version. And I thought it said to chapter 12 for last episode, but it said through chapter 12. So I underread, and thus, to catch up, I overread this episode. But a fair amount of what happens in these chapters, I feel like can be summarized because they're conversations with a lot of explanation of the emotional weight of some things. So I feel like it won't harm things to sort of condense a little bit. So I think we're going to be okay. But I could have kept reading last time and I didn't, and I'm very annoyed with myself. So this episode, starting off with chapter 12, we are with Elgin Spears, and he did not go to California. I really thought that he would. I don't know if it's made clear exactly where he is. It's just that he couldn't go to California because of the risk of any sort of facial recognition software being able to spot him. And it says, at least with his current face on, he liked this face. And this is one of those things where, on the one hand, somebody like me who is super cautious, I would probably just be like, whatever, I'll just switch my face. This is way too much of a pain. But Elgin Spears has really cultivated a certain level of, celebrity and notoriety and power with the face he's got on. So I could see him just being like, well, I can't sacrifice that now when I might need to cash in on it more than ever, even though it's also a liability. But I am really curious if he were to decide to use a different face, how that would work. I really would like to know just exactly the way that he would change it out. And I don't know if we'll ever get to see that, but I would like to know. So we have him dealing with his much more inferior automated computer system and just continually getting irritated by how slow it is, how it at one point it tells him the data that he is going to need, sort of, I can't even remember the way that he says, initiate contingency 7500 gamma epsilon 811 hydra. And it estimates 6 months for this to take place, and he just loses his mind. And honestly, it's very fun to see him lose his mind. Unfortunately, it feels pretty short-lived. So first he has a conversation with Quaid, aka Aftermath, who is extremely fucking smug, and Spears can't handle that. He doesn't like anybody being smug but him. As somebody who frequently is smug, same. It takes one smug one to know one, and there is nothing worse to a smug person than another smug person. So look, I don't like to compare myself to Spears all that often, but I gotta own it when it's true. And Quaid is basically, because Spears is like, I'm going to need you to set some shit up and take this bitch out. And Quaid is like, dude, look, I completely also want that. But we haven't got any of the momentum behind us needed to do that. As he puts it, he says, we can respond in two ways. We can apply enough force to redirect the momentum to our benefit, or we step aside and let it expend itself. As we don't currently have the force to change its course, we only have one option left to us. And Spears is super annoyed because it's very clear Quaid is correct, and that only makes it worse. Again, same. And finally, he leans back and he has this moment of like, what the fuck am I going to do? And then all of a sudden he has this idea, and we get the Grinch-like fashion description for this grin. And I really was like, I don't know what could have started this. It says, all he could see was red, the color of human blood, the color of his enemy's blood. Then, as his mind slowly quieted down to a single thought, a smile split Elgin Spears' face ear to ear in Grinch-like fashion. So, something about the color of blood, is it because they see in, like, I can't remember the name of it because it's mentioned later the way that the shark men see, or is it just, like, blood in the water and that, like, making him think of sharks? I'm just curious about, there's a few directions that this thought process could have gone in. Or is it just Crimson Shark because his name is Crimson? Is that it? It could, like I said, there's like a variety of ways, and it doesn't really like matter because in any of those cases it works that he would think of this. But I was just curious if there was something specific that you knew of. So then we go to Ryan, Jordan, and Jill, and they are at his facility in Puget Sound. And they have found the spot where Brian evidently busted out of here. I said last episode, I'm picturing like the Hulk and him waking up and ripping himself free of all of these things. And I'm sure it's not that dramatic. It sounds like it was that dramatic, but we didn't see it. We just find the aftermath of it, which I kind of like better because it's just left to your imagination exactly what the fuck went on when he woke up. And I'm super curious about like when he wakes up, he voluntarily underwent this procedure, so he knows what's going on. But was like the fact that he broke through the wall, it feels like either it wasn't as easy for him to find a way out without Spears here, or he was just so out of control when he came to that he just took the fastest way out. And that's because like later he says to Jordan when she like is confronted with him by surprise that he went away so that he could learn how to use his abilities because he was not able to handle things initially. So, you know, it could have been one of two things, either an angry reaction to the situation he woke up in because it wasn't what he was expecting, or simply not being in control of himself. And, you know, it does follow that the vibe of his thoughts would have changed and that he would be out of control mentally as well as physically, because it seems like there has been quite a change made. And Jordan can smell that he was here, but also that the smell is like not him. And it makes her feel really sick to her stomach. And it takes a little while, but eventually they are able to open a computer terminal and they find out that Jordan's DNA was the key to Spears unlocking the awakening procedure. And Jordan is just like, motherfucker, because it being like her blood that gave him the pathway to doing this is just insult to injury. And there is a moment here too. She says, she's thinking, I've taken him for granted. He was right. I didn't respect him. And I really appreciated this because over and over again in the next couple of chapters, she is realizing that she like just handled everything all wrong. And it's just awful because I get what she was trying to do, but it seems like everyone around her was aware that the way she was choosing to handle it was destined to fail, you know? And just, I said this as well when I was like in his POV and hearing the way that she was responding to him. I just couldn't figure out how she didn't see the way that she dismissed him. And eventually, when she's talking to Douglas, she says something like, I'm a right selfish bitch, aren't I? And he just says, sometimes you are. Look, we all need friends who will tell us the truth about these things. You know, what good is a friend if they can't be like, look, occasionally you could rein in the fact that you are such a selfish bitch. This is why I have the friends I do, because they are as candid as I am about these things. So then we go to the Tretiak and Young conversation. Young is just wanting to die. That's what I'm getting from him in these chapters, is Young is tired of being alive and has figured it's time to throw in the towel. Because otherwise, I cannot understand how often he shoots his mouth off. Tretiak is all that stands between him and Arkady breaking his neck, and then later on between him and Spears breaking his neck. And Tretiak does not even like him that much. So that's like a really feeble thing to hang your hat on. And just, you know, I'm not even mad because I dislike Young so much that him constantly putting himself in danger is fine. I don't care. Go ahead. I hope you die because you suck. But it is remarkable how little he has learned to curb his tongue. And Arkady is really not happy about this proposition. We find out that Elgin Spears has approached the Crimson Shark about teaming up and getting these guys to train an awakened army for him in exchange for a great deal of money, like so much money. And I love that he's paying them in like solid gold and also some metal. It's not uranium, but is it iridium? I can't remember the name of the metal, but it makes sense because like so many of his assets would have to be frozen that paying in either cash or gold would have to be the way. And yeah, Arkady is just like, we can't like do business with this guy because he is like lacking in honor and ethics and respect. And basically Tretiak is like, dude, I respect the fact that you have these kinds of principles. And I do think they are important. Don't get me wrong. But also, we are broke. And if we want to do literally anything, we need money to get there. And Arkady just doesn't really seem to understand, like, because what Tretiak says is food costs money, ammunition costs money, everything costs money. And Arkady says respect doesn't, honor doesn't. And I'm like, can you eat respect, sir? I mean, really, like, what even is your argument with that? That's nothing. There's an episode of Community which Betty White guested on as an anthropology teacher. And she asks her students to choose whatever the like most powerful weapon that mankind has at their disposal and try it, and like something that's, you know, not automated or whatever, and try and fight back against whatever weapon she chooses. And somebody goes up and says, I choose to fight with respect. And she picks up some wild thing that's got like a noose on one end and like a blow dart. It's like crazy. And she says, okay, well, I'm going to attack you with this. You go ahead and use respect to defend yourself, and takes the guy fucking down in front of the entire class. And it is honestly one of the better moments in that entire show. So yeah, we get a good description of just the state of the place that they are hunkered down in here. And like, it's serving their purposes for sure. But if they want to move forward at all, they need capital. That is the way of the world. And Trechek is also starting to get a little frustrated with Arkady because he is not like, apparently Trechek has had to explain repeatedly why it is they're working with Briar Young, and Arkady just keeps asking the same, like, why do we even keep him around? And Trechek is like, oh my god, dude, we have been over this many times. I am really kind of sick of talking about it, actually, because it's clear you don't want an answer because you just don't like this guy, and you really need to get the fuck over it because business requires things sometimes. This is so funny too because it reminds me of sort of like Arkady is sort of behaving like, well, I don't want to sell out, man. And I'm like, Arkady, I don't know what you thought was going on with your crew, but what like altruistic or honorable goal were you thinking everybody was working towards being part of this organization? Because I kind of thought the whole point of them was that they were mercenaries. But the way Arkady is behaving, it's like he thinks that this is just a distraction from other things that they should be doing. And I am wondering if I like missed something. Like, are they just meant to take over the world? Are they intending that? And he feels like this is distracting from that accomplishing, like, you know, world domination. But it sort of reminds me of people who are like, oh man, you used to be about the art, about the music before you just sold out. And it's like, well, I can't make music if I don't sell out at least a little bit, you know, like that's just part of being alive. That's capitalism. It's wild though. We have had like such a shift because I remember that being the thing people always said, like in the 90s especially, it used to be about the music. And now people are so much more vehement about support artists because they need money to live. And like, it used to be looked down on if somebody got their commercial, like for Toyota and their song was on it. But now it's like, oh, good for them. They made a deal with like, you know, this YouTuber with Estee Lauder, and now they're actually going to make a living. Like, I'm so happy for them. We've really just kind of turned a weird corner, you know? I think it's good. Don't get me wrong, but it's just funny to think how different it used to be. So then we have the meet with Elgin Spears. And, oh, wait, before that, though, Arkady gets sent away. I keep saying his name differently. I think I'm going to stick with Arkady. Arkady gets sent away, and he is meant to, like, be marshaling the troops, essentially. And it leaves Trechek and Young to have a conversation. And Young is trying to get, like, the fee for his help dealing with Jordan half up front, and is really throwing his weight around. And Trechek is like, you know what? And he punches him and sends him flying across the room and is like, have I made our positions clear? And Briar is like, yep, I'm good. It's fine. And I was just like, yeah, dude, I don't know how many times you're going to have to get decked, but apparently the answer is always one more time because you will not shut the fuck up. And eventually there is the meetup with Elgin, and he is just he has an attitude that Trechek wasn't prepared for. He describes it as a cold rage when he was like expecting this guy to be ranting and raving and like upset. And instead there's a focus and a vibe to him that feels a lot more dangerous than he used to feel. I think Trechek is realizing that he might have underestimated this guy. And Elgin makes the proposal and offers the money and everything. And he tries at first to just be like well, I'm giving you this money so you'll do what I say. And Trecek is like, no. That is not how we work. We're not like salaried employees. You will pay us for an assignment, which we will complete. And that will be the end of that relationship until you issue another assignment for money. We aren't lackeys that hang around waiting for you to give us directions. That's not how this works. And I was like, yeah, that is a very important distinction. And I kind of appreciated it because I feel like Elgin has gotten a little bit too used to just being able to like pull somebody up in his fucking Rolodex and be like, here, do a thing. And I don't need him being able to do that with these guys. They're too dangerous. I appreciate them really establishing a like professional line that they won't cross in dealing with him. And this is when he starts talking about Jordan. And this is when Briar like chimes in again and basically is like, you guys all need to stop trying to fight Jordan. Jordan is a fighter. That's what she does. None of you has ever gone up against her and actually won. I haven't gone up against her and actually won. We can't because she's very good. You have to find a different way in. And then he mentions her husband. And Elgin just starts cracking up and gets in his car and leaves. And everybody is just sort of like, okay, what the fuck was that? And I am assuming that Elgin is just realizing that he had leverage that he no longer has, because it doesn't feel like the kind of laughter where, you know, in the end of the last chapter where he gets his little Grinch-like smile because he thinks of something that will work. It feels a lot more like the response of a guy who is laughing at how it's like that moment in, sorry, I have this itch on my face and I keep trying to scratch it and I can't get it. And it's like, my skin is so oily. It feels like that moment in Breaking Bad where Walt realizes that the money under the house is gone. Spoilers for Breaking Bad. And he just lays back and laughs hysterically in a complete panic. And that's the end of the episode. It's like that kind of, I really thought I had it. I can't believe I didn't. Oh my God. You know, just those moments. So yeah, I mean, I've sort of wondered whether Elgin had built in something to whatever he did to Brian that would cause him to have some control over Brian. And I maintain a question about that. I don't know if that's something that is even possible because the awakening process that he's using is unfamiliar. We don't have a lot of details. It's so recent that he even figured this out. And so I'm like, he could be laughing because he actually does have something. But I think it's more of a like, I can't believe I just let that like slip through my fingers kind of thing. And yeah, so that's pretty much what's going on there. So then we go to Reggie. This is awful. It turns out that the person Reggie talked to was Elgin. He disguised his voice, I guess, because he knew that people were listening in and he just didn't want them to trace it back to him, I guess. I'm not entirely sure, but we get this whole like story from her that's really, I like knew it was him before we get the reveal, but I also didn't. And I was like, God damn it. I hoped it wasn't. So we've got Tristan and McIntyre here at her door, basically confronting her about what she did. And it's a bad scene. Tristan, because Chance is his brother, is in quite a state because he just, it's a combination for him of being betrayed on a professional level and his brother's love of his life betraying them all as well. It's just a real bad scene for him. And they ask her why. And she sits down and explains to them all about what it was like for her as a kid with the abilities that she has. And I really appreciated this because it sounds awful. And this is a thing also in another series that I will be covering soon, the Sookie Stackhouse series, which will be a patrons only show that I do with Miles that I'm super excited about. But the abilities of people who can hear thoughts and read minds, when you don't have training on how to use them and protect yourself, those abilities can be really overwhelming and just drive you completely out of your mind. And this is an episode of Buffy as well, where she gets this ability and she winds up practically like comatose because she is so completely overwhelmed by this barrage of input. It's sort of like what's going on with Jenna, weirdly, that she has to sort of retreat to her room and just hide and be as far away from people as she can so that she doesn't get inundated all the time. And she like talks about how she didn't even realize what it was that she was doing, and her parents didn't either, but she saw her father's thoughts about a woman who was not her mother. And she shared that with her mom, not understanding what it was that she was seeing, and essentially outed her dad as having an affair with her mother's best friend. And so this leads to their divorce, which of course, like, she blames herself, but also she doesn't, because she didn't know what she was doing. And also her dad was cheating. But it led to her mother basically like becoming an alcoholic and sort of abandoning her. And I mean sort of, but then it is a literal abandonment where her mother brings her to like a bus stop and leaves her there, or a tube stop. And she is so flipped out by being surrounded by all of these people at the tube station that she can't communicate like with anybody about what's going on with her, until she accidentally stumbles across Elgin Spears. And there's also some talk about like the men that her mother tries to date can't deal with this like weirdo daughter that her mother has. So it's like having this kid is sort of like making it so that she can't move forward in her personal life as well. It's just an awful story. I really felt for her with this. And so Elgin takes her in and has like control over his own thoughts in a way that she has never been around anyone who managed that before. So she's able to feel like some peace with him. And he brings her to a facility that's like far away from other people and teaches her how to use what she can do and control it so that it's not just a constant input, you know? And basically, as far as she is concerned, he saves her life and gets her to a state where she can actually be a person and live a normal life when that just looked like it was never going to happen. And so she feels like she owes him everything. And what she decided to do is follow his instructions about being a mole and feeding him information. And when these dudes like hear this story, it's clear that they have a lot of sympathy for her overall situation, but they're still planning on doing what the fuck they're going to do. But I love this moment. When he asked me to help him, I couldn't say no. I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt any of you. I don't want to hurt any of you. That's why this is so painful for me. And McIntyre realizes, like, as she's saying that, what she means, but it's too late. And she attacks them mentally. This is so wild. Reggie took her unchained emotions, turning them into raw power. Suddenly, Tristan howled in agony and fell to the ground, jerking uncontrollably. McIntyre stumbled back and slammed through the coffee table with a loud crash. Unlike Tristan, McIntyre was still conscious. And Reggie is looking at him like, wait, what? That's usually enough, but you're still like awake. And then we have this moment Reggie held the image in her mind's eye for a single breath before thrusting it towards Ethan McIntyre's mind. There was an explosion of pain, followed by an agonized scream that caused tears to stream down her cheeks. Reggie ignored the tears and the pain, and thrust the mental blade again and again until the screaming stopped. I really thought that she had killed them both. It turns out McIntyre is fine. Like, I know that he's Incarna, but I don't really know what their limitations are exactly, you know? So I was like, they weren't aware she had this level of power. It is certainly possible that she is capable of something that could actually hurt him. I don't really know how that goes. Tristan is just, you know, he's been put into a coma. This shit is affecting him slightly differently than McIntyre. And I really feel for him in his position and Chance later, because Jordan has to tell him what happened. And he just initially won't believe it, which I completely understand, especially considering that initially he thinks that she's just taking McIntyre's word for it. And considering that he's such a piece of shit, understandably, Chance is like, he's just saying this to fuck with us. But it turns out Tristan was wearing a camera for this whole thing. So they have footage of it and of her saying it all. And Chance watches it twice and is about to watch it a third time before Jordan manages to stop him and be like, dude. But it's just an awful moment because he was truly in love with her, like a genuine, you know, and the whole like betrayal, especially considering how few women are part of the organization. Like when Jordan is told that a woman betrayed them, she zeroes in on it being Reggie pretty quickly and is just like, what the fuck? And it's just an awful situation of the betrayal coming from somebody that nobody would ever have predicted. Once Briar surfaces and they realize that he's actually still alive and that he betrayed them, I think the fact that he is still alive will come as a much greater surprise than the fact that he betrayed them. There are some people that you're just like, well, of course it was you. But Reggie wasn't one of them. And now it makes sense why she didn't go with Chance, because she had to stay with the organization that she promised to mine information from. So yeah, that's what's going on there. We go here to Jordan and Jason having a sparring match. And she is just so amped up over everything that's been going on and is going pretty hard and just gives Jason permission to also go hard. And they both sort of let it rip and see really who is the best if they just go all out. But she isn't at peak performance because she's distraught and distracted. So he manages to get the win, but it doesn't feel like that's actually a fair contest in a lot of ways, you know? And then, of course, there's this moment here where he's like on top of her and he has her pinned and the sexual tension is like, you know, getting really high. And she has this moment where she kind of like encourages him to kiss her with her body movement, and he pulls back and is like, this is too much trouble, we can't do this. And she finally asks him, what are you doing to me? And I didn't realize that she meant literally the first time she asks until he says, really, I'm not doing anything, I went through this with Jill. And I was like, oh, she means like doing to her. And he says, Jill says I don't have pheromones, so that's not it. And then she tries to say maybe there's something like telepathic. And eventually he's just like, dude, you're unhappy in your marriage and you're horny. It doesn't have to be a fucking magical power. You want someone who you don't have to worry about hurting in bed, who can match up to you in a fight, who understands what drives you. It's really not a mystery. It's just the way things work. And I really appreciate that as much as Jason doesn't like, you know, he's not Brian's buddy or anything. He's still pretty defensive of Brian here. And is just like, dude, I know that you think that you were able to keep your shit to yourself, but do you really think that your own husband can't tell if you're unhappy? Because I gotta tell you, dudes know, and they react a lot of different ways, but they know, unless they're completely oblivious or they don't care. And he's neither of those things. You've got to give him a little bit more credit than you have been. And I really just appreciated that he just keeps being like, look, you're acting like what happened between y'all was sort of like a mystery or came as a surprise. It really shouldn't be, because we all saw it, and Douglas tells her this later. And finally she asks, well, what if I asked you to go to bed with me? And he straight up says, no, I would not do it. First of all, you're in pain. So you'd be doing something that was motivated by distress, which means that you're like in a vulnerable position. And I would be kind of taking advantage of you. And also, I'm just not going to be the guy who fucks a married woman. If you are going to leave your husband, fine. But you're not going to do that, at least not yet. And I'm not doing that at the moment. This is just not the situation. And I respect Brian, even if I don't really like him. I'm not going to do that to him either. So, yeah. And I love she says, I was just testing you. And he's like, you were half testing me. Be angry with Brian if you want. If he went to Spears to get awakened, you can bet he did it for you as much as himself. And she says, I told him he didn't need to be different for me. And he's like, I know what you said, but you've got to be able to tell like what you were saying with the rest of your actions. It's not just the words that come out of your mouth. This is something that I feel like so many people don't get. You can say with words anything you want. That's the whole point of the phrase, talk is cheap. Don't write checks you can't cash. Your mouth writes checks you can't cash, however that goes. I have had a number of relationships now under my belt. And the thing that so many people that I have dated or who I have been friends with who've talked to me about their relationships have said is that people will think just telling you they're sorry or telling you they're happy is enough when everything about the way they behave is pointing in a different direction. And it's part of like, well, I said I was sorry. Yeah. And then you did the exact same thing again, which really points to the fact that you're not sorry. It's just that you don't want me to be mad at you. And that's not really the same thing. And yeah, she's like trying to say, I don't need you to change for me. And then she's boxing him out of all the important information repeatedly, even when he tells her how it makes him feel. I mean, she doesn't see him as an equal. She just doesn't. And he can tell because of the what she's doing versus what she's saying to him. And this is when Jason takes off and Douglas comes in and they go to have some of his like deadly alcohol. That's the only thing that can get them drunk because of their crazy metabolisms. And they start talking about Brian. And it turns out that Brian's been confiding in Douglas more than Jordan thought. And she says, how do I make this right? And he says, right for who? I really liked that. Like, yeah, what does that mean? And she says, I'm not happy. Brian was a better man than she deserved. And despite his failings, she hadn't treated him well. If their issues had simply been about career choices, maybe she could have adjusted, but they weren't so simple. Jason was right. Physically, she wanted more. Emotionally, she needed a man that understood what made her tick, and Brian wasn't that man. She hoped that maybe he could become that, though perhaps that was just the alcohol talking. And I'm like, you may be getting a little bit more than you bargained for on that. And Douglas says, Brian wants to cage you. I'm pretty sure he thought he just had to wait for you to get tired of the job and you'd come running to his mansion and his expensive cars and holidays abroad. This is sort of an interesting thing because I didn't get that sense from him. And Douglas is saying this with quite a bit of certainty. And I don't know if it's just that I was giving Brian more of a benefit of the doubt than he deserved, but it always felt more like he was worried about her and, felt a way about sort of being left on the sidelines because he didn't used to know what she did for a living. So he married her without full awareness of who he was marrying, to be perfectly honest. I don't really feel like I don't know. This just didn't quite ring true for me. But I just feel like maybe if he had gone into it knowing who she was, it might have been different. I don't know. And I love when Jordan says, would it be so bad to be a wife and maybe a mother? And he just says, I don't know, would it? And she goes, ugh. And he just is like, see, you know the answer to this. If you wanted to be that, then you would be that. And this is when she talks about what she can do if she weren't using it to its full extent. It would be a complete waste, and that she needs it. My mind needs this work. It needs the challenge. And I think that is particularly key, the way that she says it. The abilities that she has. It's not just, I want to use them. It's, I can't not use them and feel like myself, And I feel like this is the sort of thing that drove me to the career change that I made, where eventually I began podcasting full time. Every time that I tried a different career, it was yeah, but I have this other ability. This every place I've worked, I have been the class clown, the one taking charge, the one giving instruction and organizing things. And it always felt like the jobs I had were not up to it. I was bigger than the jobs, you know what I mean? And yet I couldn't not do that stuff. It was unsatisfying if I didn't organize and take charge and entertain and make people laugh. And eventually I wound up doing what I'm doing because it just sort of felt like, well, otherwise, what am I doing? So I just understand that aspect of it, the feeling of if I don't, I will wither away. I can't just cut off that part of myself. I don't want to cut off that part of myself. And this is when Douglas says, what if he comes back with powers? And she says, I'll take him back. And he says, but you aren't happy. Someone will have to teach him how to use any power he has. What does being happy have to do with that? Love isn't a duty, Jordan. You're trying to turn Brian into a duty. You can't do that. I'll train him, or one of us will. You two have enough problems without adding training into it. And I really appreciated this because this is another thing, is so many people feel like they have to stay with a person out of an obligation. And it's just I understand that feeling. And there's all kinds of things that can come with this. I had a friend who had cancer, and her boyfriend at the time told her, he was with her throughout all of her treatments and everything. And at one point she was clearly unhappy. And she said to me that he stayed through her side all through cancer. And it was honestly, this is in the Sex and the City movie as well. But it was genuinely a friend of mine who went through this. And I was like, he stayed with you through cancer. That doesn't mean that you just have to stay together now. That's not how that works. This isn't a transactional, and she wound up breaking up with him and has told me more than once, even though we don't talk that much anymore, about how grateful she is that I was one of the only people who told her, you should leave him, because he was being kind of a shit. He stayed with her, but it felt like he was half there, And yeah, it's just, the ways that we find to like make it seem that we have to stay with somebody for various reasons, a lot of the time just, I can't ruin his life like that. How much do you think a man's life is ruined by being in a relationship with a person who doesn't want to be there, who's faking it the whole time they're together and resents him and pities him and doesn't feel the way they did? That's so much worse, you know, and people don't stop and see it that way. So, yeah, he says, essentially, you took control of the relationship. He told me that essentially everything always had to be your way. He doesn't feel like an equal. And he loves you to death. He just doesn't know how to handle you. I don't have the answers you want. If you love him, you'll find a way to make him feel it. Men need to feel like men. I hate that line, though. I really hate that. Men need to, like, what does that mean? It's in our DNA, and I bet if you ask Lyndon, he'll tell you that. Again, men need to feel like men is almost always women need to shrink themselves to make men feel better. That's almost always what that line means. And I don't think that's exactly what William is saying here, but it feels a little bit like that. And I rolled my eyes really hard. Show Brian you're able to concede just a little ground to him. Let him be right. If he comes back awakened and alive, then embrace it. Like it or not, he did it for you. If you throw it back in his face, he's going to leave you. I know I would. And so the balance of this, I don't like men need to feel like men because that just feels like nothing. But the concede a little ground, I think that is really fair. When it's always, like I had said this before when they got in a couple arguments, Jordan always gets her way. And whatever he wants isn't a priority for her at all. It's just like what she wants and needs always comes first because she's the one risking her life. So she can kind of throw that in his face a lot of the time and be like, I don't need this right now. I just did blank, 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 and names all this dramatic shit she did. And it's like, well, there's two people here though. That's not how it goes. So like I said, I don't really think that Douglas meant this the way that it's usually meant, but that kind of line is used a lot by people who are being misogynistic. So I just had a knee-jerk reaction to it. But this is when she says, I'm a right selfish bitch, aren't I? And he says, you can be. But also a loving, selfless woman who wants to save the world. When the time comes, save your world first and then everybody else's. And then they talk about him and Ryan. And she gives her seal of approval and even is like, maybe one day you'll get married and you'll be part of my family. And he's like, yo, slow your roll. It doesn't have to be like that. So yeah, that is the moment where she actually seems to like understand what's going on and realize how unreasonable she's been in more ways than just like, I've been wanting to fuck Jason. It's like a lot more than that. So Chapter 14 is the meeting between Cassidy and McIntyre and Jordan and Jason. I love that at one point McIntyre's like, why the fuck is Jason here? And basically Jordan is like, because I fucking said so. But yeah, this is a sharing of information. The only thing that doesn't get shared is who the Genagir informant is, because she gave her word that she would not reveal that. But McIntyre is such a fucking bitch about the fact that she won't share this. And I love the fact at one point, is it Cassidy or Lancaster that like yells at him? I think it's Cassidy, who is just like, you will fucking give us the information like you said, or I will tell her myself. McIntyre keeps on being so petty and small about everything. Considering that he is a being who has lived for thousands of years, it's pathetic. Like, truly, he is just sad. So they're meeting up and talking about the overall situation and where everything stands, because things are getting out of hand between what happened with Reggie, and And Cassidy is saying, you guys need each other for the moment. All of you join together, create a task force that can deal with what we're facing. But you're all separated and we can't have this. So there's this moment here that I thought was sort of weird. One hand is filled with strength, Cassidy said, gesturing to Jordan and Jason. Another sees, he continued, motioning to Lancaster. Lastly, he gestured to McIntyre. While the last is the most experienced. You need each other, and the world needs you to realize that. The cadence of Cassidy's voice reminded Jordan of the Chamber of 12. The recognition of that was plain on Lancaster's handsome face, as well as McIntyre's. Only Jason didn't understand it, though the gentle nod he responded with told her that the meaning wasn't lost on him. I didn't understand what that meant, because only Jason didn't understand the cadence of his... I just didn't really understand this moment, because it almost made it sound like this guy was speaking in another language, but he's not. And the cadence of his voice doesn't seem to change the meaning of his words. So I was just a little bit confused by like what exactly is happening with that moment. But anyway, so this is when Lancaster says that Tretiak escaped and Jordan almost loses her fucking mind. First, that's not supposed to be possible. And secondly, it's been months since this happened and nobody told her. And Jordan is like, what the fuck? And McIntyre goes, you gave up our resources, Jordan. I assumed you had thought that through and realized there would be consequences. Your freedom has a price. And honestly, sir, that is such a cunty thing to say. What even does that mean? All it means is I'm punishing you for leaving by not sharing information that could kill you. And you should be ashamed to admit that out loud and act like you have an upper hand here. Because that's all it is being a petty brat. And it's pitiful. And at this point, McIntyre's like, oh, well, you raided Imagine's facility and you had to know some information you didn't share with us about the people that were there. And Lancaster has to step in and be like, they didn't know. It was luck. They jumped in doing something different. We should take it and run. We don't need the sort of disclosure Jordan's team is going to force. You call it luck. I call it sloppy. I'm disappointed, really. Get over yourself. I hate him. Truly. McIntyre blows. Like, I really just don't. He is like a step away from being Elgin Spears. He is so close to being an actual enemy. It's like almost impossible to perceive the difference between them. So yeah, and this is when she says he was using a different type of technology than we had ever seen. And the number system for the interface was base 12. And this is when Lancaster says Spears is a Genegier, and McIntyre kind of loses his mind. Tries to come up with several other explanations as to why things are so advanced. And essentially they're like, no, he's not piecing together shit he doesn't understand. He's full on using levels of technology. He's a Genegier. He knows this stuff. And this is when he gets very bitter about the fact that she's not sharing who her source is. But you know what? Frankly, it's just, you don't need to know. You just don't. And he doesn't want to admit that he doesn't need to know. I don't know if McIntyre has informed Jordan of the fact that her sisters are all under his training right now, but doesn't feel like Cassidy knows. It's unclear to me how aware anybody is of that going on, because I feel like that would have come up and it doesn't. So I'm not sure if that's like completely secret and Lancaster doesn't know either or what, because I feel like this meeting would not be taking place like this if they knew. Okay, Heather says he has not, neither of them know. Okay, yeah. So we'll just wait and see how that turns out, because I feel like that's not going to go super well for you, McIntyre. And if they do find out, you're going to want to leave the country. You're going to want to leave the planet. Low key. Like, that's not going to be good. I mean, you think she's mad now. Ugh. Jason has to literally hold her back a couple times because he's being such a douche. And finally, Jordan explains what happened with Brian, and Lancaster promises to put out a bolo. McIntyre asks for info to help her as well, and she like agrees to the help, but she's very suspicious of it, which she should be because he's a piece of shit. And it basically wraps with all of them talking about the betrayal by Reggie and the fact that Spears just has more info than any of them wanted to realize, and it is becoming more and more clear that they have to work together. And then we get the awful moment where she has to tell Chase what's going on. I hate it. It's poor Chance. I keep saying Chase. Poor Chance. So then we get the last section in this chapter. Jordan is alone in her room, and she's not tired, and she's just kind of like stalking around, doesn't know what to do with herself. She doesn't know where Brian is, and she's just overthinking everything. She keeps thinking about poor Chance and how he has like completely dissolved. And more than once in her life, Jordan had been called an ice queen. It used to bother her, but she had come to realize it was a sort of armor. Tonight, she hadn't donned it. Jordan wondered about Brian, her worry shifting from a constant whisper to a shout amongst her thoughts. Chasing after anything besides him felt wrong. She wanted to go out and look for him. Brian was hers and she was his, and he would never stop looking for her if she were in this position. And eventually, we have a moment of this body that she can smell sneaking up, and it is way stronger, and pins her against the wall, forces her to drop her weapon, and she assumes that it's Tretiak because this is the only being that she has met, other than Douglas, I think, who has had the kind of like sheer strength needed to completely disarm her this way. And she's like, just at one point says, "What do you want, Tretiak?" And who? The voice replied, confused. "Jordan, don't you recognize me?" Jordan's head snapped to the side, her breath catching in her throat. Brian? Brian stepped back into the shaft of light, though it wasn't the Brian that Jordan knew. He was at least 6 inches taller, and where Brian had been lean, this man was broad, powerful. Brian's bare torso was all hard muscle, sculpted like it was made from marble. As he reached a hand out toward Jordan, she saw that his nails had been replaced by small, pointed claws. He was naked below the waist as well, and the same hard muscle continued down into powerful thighs and calves. And despite herself, Jordan found herself pleased by the changes. I was like, he's just running around straight up naked? Is that what's going on? Just straight up. All right, I'm not mad at it. Instincts whispered softly about running or striking, and Jordan ignored them. The siren song of Brian's scent robbed Jordan's common sense of its voice. "See, I'm not going to hurt you," Brian said. He pushed unruly black bangs from his face and proffered a familiar lopsided smile. His eyes, though, they were different. Black on gold, full of intent and the gleam of a predator. And this moment is so funny because this feels very correct. Basically, she's like, "Are you okay? We need to get you to see a doctor." And he's like, "I'm fine. I feel amazing. Everything is awesome. And I definitely want to fuck you. And I can tell that you want to fuck me, so can we fuck?" And she's saying no and pushing him off. And he's like, "You want me to. I mean, I can tell. You very much want me to." And I think he can tell in like the scent kind of way, the way that she can tell, you know. I don't think he's just going like, "You say that, but you really want it." I think he is using multiple cues that he can now access to tell part of her wants it, because she does partially. She can't deny that. Even inside, she's just kind of like, "Oh my God, he smells really good. And I'm like kind of into this." And finally, she shoves him away. And He tried to catch himself, but ended tumbling over the foot of the bed. Anger and frustration passed through his features, though they were soon replaced by confusion. Jordan, I'm just happy to see you. I missed so much, but I had to stay away for a while. I was learning how to use my powers. And she has like, because he sort of like tore open the front of her outfit and she's like holding it closed. And he says, I need your help. And she says, you know, I'll help you. You have to stop doing whatever you're doing right now, please. And when she says she's afraid, he says, you don't need to be afraid of anything ever again. Jordan's eyes returned to the black pools that had become Brian's eyes. She watched them for a long while before answering. Jordan didn't feel the compulsion tugging at her like it had been. The sensation lingered, however, just out of reach, so hard to detect she wasn't even sure it was there. I'm just glad you're home. We'll get through this. So, yeah, this is very interesting because this is definitely a pheromone thing. Whatever's going on with Jason, that's natural. And what's going on with Brian is chemically induced. The question is, how much does it matter that she's married to one of them and not married to the other one? And as much as it's artificial with Brian, or artificially induced, now it is permanent. Don't think there's any going back. So, look, if I'm being honest, I really want her to fuck him. I really, really do. I really want to know, now that she gets to fuck somebody else awakened, how different it's going to be. And I want them to like go all out. I want it to be a destroy the room kind of session because I just want to know, you know, like just, it's sort of like she's going to get the opportunity to follow through on the feelings that she had from Trechuk's pheromones, but with somebody that she's actually cared about and married to. So it's like an exploration of something that felt so strong in a safe way. It just feels almost like the fulfilling of a fantasy, even though it's like a fantasy she didn't want kind of thing. So yeah, I am rooting for them to fuck, but I understand her not wanting to. I really do. I also feel like fucking him right now would just be affirmation that, oh, I did want this actually. Even though I said I didn't, I was either lying or in denial. And clearly I did, because now I'm fucking you with abandon. So maybe she doesn't want to send that message. Again, I sympathize. But also, just take him for a little test drive, sister. That's all I'm saying. Just, a bitch wants to know. You know, I'm just saying, I love Owen dearly. But if he turned up ripped, 6 inches taller, and could throw me around, I don't think I'd exactly be upset about it. And I'm pretty sure Owen could say almost that exact sentence I just said and have the same intent, because Owen is very into muscular women. So if I turned up 6 inches taller and could toss him around, I think he'd be very into it. So, you know, we all have our things, and you can love your partner dearly and still be like, well, I mean, you know. So it's over. It's done. I mean, you may as well sort of enjoy it. That's all I'm saying. All right. I have to wrap. But thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this. It was a lot of fun. And I am very excited to find out whether or not she fucks him. Stay tuned. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.